Shaw writes, the final event for the body of a person in this universe is death, and if no comprehensive preservation strategy such as Krynex is implemented, then the end point is dissolution into the environment. These rites center around the reminder that we are immortal and that those who remain behind in this world need not permanently lose their loved ones. Death is an illusion. The disposition of the body, however, unless deliberately preserved with resurrection in mind, is not a matter that concerns the praxis. However, it is assumed that there will be a funeral or remembrance ceremony. This is a very brief recommended format, since we really do believe that we are immortal and will live again to be reunited with our loved ones in a world made perfect. However, it should be borne in mind that such rites are for the living and not the dead, especially there for the living who are not members of the praxis and who perhaps see death as a permanent loss and not a temporary parting. It is to them that whatever words of comfort and aid should be directed by the magister, that is the person who directs the ceremony. The suggested minimal format and wording delivered by the magister is as follows, with friends and family gathered together. We are gathered here today to mourn the passing of Dan Massey from this world as he continues onwards towards the awakening into eternal life. While he has departed our world, we have not departed his, and we will remember. In time, if we wish it, we shall meet again in a world made right, where all tears will be washed away, all sins resolved, and love reigns in perfect knowledge. This is the pledge of the consensus of the practice. At this point, I ask who here speaks for the dead. The reply, for those who wish to give it, is I speak for the dead. So I ask the question, who here speaks for the dead? And that ends the ceremony, or at least a part of the praxis. What normally would follow would be various eulogies and a description of his life and hopes. From what I've gathered, Dan Massey believed, much as we do, that we will be recreated again.
That's really very moving. So at the end of the ceremony, you ask the audience if someone wants to take the floor to give a eulogy to the departed friend.
Yes, I mean, the formal question is who here speaks for the dead. In the wider context of the praxis, for those who are members of the praxis, it means more than just giving a eulogy. It means they are committed to bringing this person back again if they have the power in the future. As a
so
member
in this
of the praxis.
Case, and I don't know, I mean, I'm not going to say that as we would say that in the praxis meeting, of course, because I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to say. But I'd like to offer just a few words for Dan. In that spirit, I wish him the best on the eternal, infinite journey that he was expecting to take after that. Now, that was about death ceremonies. What about the other end of life? What do you do when a baby is born?
Well, I shall have to scroll up to the relevant ceremony. There is a birth and naming ceremony, and I'll read the relevant section of the suggested format delivered by the magister. The child is presented to the attendees of the ceremony as they would be in almost any society. And the words are, before friends, family, and members of the praxis, we give this child of the family these given names. The names have been chosen for these reasons and have these meanings. The parents are expected, obviously, to provide the names and the reasons for the naming. We then say, we welcome this child into the world, a unique being in this universe, as the new life from which his or her soul will grow into the tree of eternal life. We pray that his or her life in this world, amongst those who are here today, is long, happy, and successful. Do each of you gathered here pledge to aid fully this child to the best of your ability to grow into a soul of honor, bravery, compassion, honesty, and knowledge, become a tribute to this world and others beyond? And then each of those gathered are expected to reply, yes to that. The ceremony ends with the words, "So be it." And again, each person present may speak as to what they would expect to do for the child.
How about other important things, like, for example, marriage?
Okay, marriage. This is slightly more controversial, certainly in Britain and America. The praxis does not specify who or what may marry whom. Marriage is viewed by the praxis as a close alliance of two or more individuals born out of love and as a suitable setting for the raising of children. If children are involved, then it is expected the marriage will not be dissolved before those children who are born into it become adults. I shall read from the book itself. As I write, a contentious political religious issue is raging in the US and the UK, same-sex marriage. This is actually a multifaceted argument due to the fact that marriage is a religious, secular and state-regulated institution affecting the legal status, or lack of it, of those being married. Through official marriage, the state implements a wide range and binding contract upon those being married with respect to property and inheritance rights, amongst others. This without even getting into issues of polygamy, polyandry and polyamory. I speak here as part of zero state. It says, in line with zero state policy, Praxis is going to ignore the impact of national laws upon marriage and consider it purely from a spiritual and contract point of view. So there are two aspects. The first concerns the legal consequences. It is expected that celebrants know the de facto legal situation to which the ceremony binds them, if it is also state sanctioned. Where it is not, or in addition, the celebrant should consider legal contract explicitly stating their wishes in the event of the dissolution of marriage by consent or by death in this world. Also in line with Praxis ethics, oaths that are taken as serious matters, so they should be very careful about what promises are made. Finally, whether a particular domain of the praxis, that is the equivalent of our church, places constraints upon the parties who wish to marry depends purely upon the nature of the domain. For example, same-sex marriage may or may not be permitted depending upon what the orientation of that group is at present. The praxis as an entire organization has no opinion on that. It's up to individual groups to decide. Suggested format and wording delivered by the Magister amongst friends and family are as follows. We are gathered here to join with names in holy matrimony to become as one in mind, body and spirit from this day forward, to comfort and aid each other in good times and bad, to intertwine souls in the branches of the tree of life, and ultimately to save each other when the time comes to speak for the dead. Question is then asked, do you, your particular name, accept these joys and responsibilities and pledge your loyalty to whoever before friends and family, gods and mortals? The celebrants reply, I do. Do you accept these joys and responsibilities and pledge your loyalty to whomever before gods and mortals? The celebrant replies, I do. If you have other statements to make or wish to make oaths, you may do so now. So the people being married may speak their pledges and rings if necessary or if desired exchanged. The Magister would then speak the words, you are now married in the eyes of the praxis. We wish you prosperity, health, happiness, and long life together in this world. And let the celebrations begin. And that is the end of the ceremony as far as the praxis is concerned.
Wow, that's great. Now, I'm wondering what are your current plans for the development of the organization of the praxis?
Well, originally in the book, I suggested that in order to create a domain of the praxis, which is equivalent of a church or lodge, that 3 people should be involved in creating it. But this is initially going to be difficult, simply because getting 3 people together in a small geographical area is problematic. It's not difficult to do in a large city, for example, like London. It's difficult to do in, say, a small town where I live. So what I would suggest is that, again, as I say at the end of the book, let 100 flowers bloom and 100 schools of heresy contend. There's nothing in the praxis that is to be enforced through law. The praxis is what people make it. And so if somebody wishes to create a branch of the praxis, I would suggest they do so. And then try and persuade other people to join and take it from there. I mean, there are no hard rules that really define what the praxis is, other than the very basic oath of initiation, which is to look after each other and to resurrect each other from the dead, if that technology ever becomes possible. So, as a first stage, I would suggest that we get together people who would be prepared to act as the local crystal seeds for domains of the praxis.
I think one of the main difficulties, especially at the beginning, will be to get a critical mass of people in the same place. In fact, when you left, because your internet connection went down, I asked Lincoln about the physical face-to-face meeting that they had they have in Salt Lake City, and he said that they meet once a month. Now, of course, that's a very special situation for the MTA, because it so happens that most members of the MTA live in the same city, but doesn't necessarily happen in a general context. And I think that's going to be one of the main organizational problems at the beginning of the establishment of the praxis. What are your thoughts about this, Dirk?
Basically, we have to go it alone as individuals, and that is the way it must be. It's easier for me in Britain because Britain is a very crowded place, or at least England is. London, which has a population of 6 million, is only about 40 minutes away. So my initial gatherings of the praxis will be amongst people in London. I also am looking to try and speak about the praxis, possibly to local Unitarians. I feel that some of them may be fairly receptive about the ideas presented. I'm not sure about Unitarianism.
I never had the feeling that there are too many Unitarians in London. It's more popular in the US, I guess.
Well, there used to be a lot in Britain. There was a church in a town I grew up in called Northampton, which is a very large church, a Unitarian church. And I actually used the Unitarian church there for many years to practice and teach martial arts in the evening. They had a big congregation space, but their congregation at the time, I think, was only a few dozen people. But they do have perhaps useful facilities, useful meeting places. And also enough people who are interested to turn up to a Unitarian meeting or discussion would probably be interested in hearing about the praxis. So for me, that is one of the possible routes to recruiting people.
How many people went to the first presentation that you gave to the London Futurist meetup a few weeks ago?
Not very many, about 20 or so. But that was the venue on that wasn't officially a London Futurist venue. It was associated with a bookshop called Atlantis. I know the woman who runs it, and it was done as part of one of their talks on general occultism and stuff like that. So it was really just a way for me to
when is the next
practice. Sorry, Julia?
Next public presentation. I hope you hear me, by the way, because my internet connection is behaving horribly.
Okay, could you repeat the question, please?
My internet connection is not behaving well.
Okay.
Dirk, have you spoken with Masons about your ideas?
Not at present, no. What I need to do first is to get the spiel correct. I need to practice speaking to people about it. Religious evangelizing doesn't come naturally to me. It's not something that I've ever done really. And because I've always been involved in the technical area, I'm not really into sales either, which is a kind of related field. So I need some practice. So I'm essentially practicing with people who are friendly audiences, transhumanists, maybe sort of fellow occultists and so forth. And then when I feel that the time is right, I'll start talking to other people, other groups. But Freemasonry is quite interesting. The problem is I don't really know any. Well, I've never been a Freemason, and I don't know any people who actually are currently in transhumanism. But membership of Freemason or Masonic organizations in this country are not open about their membership usually. So I do know some.
There are a few Mormon transhumanists who are Masons. If you'd like to speak with one or two of them, I could set you up.
Well, the problem is not so much Masonry, it's the national differences. As I understand it, in the USA, Freemasons and other people, like-minded people, are very open about their connections. In Britain, it seems to be a kind of secret thing. It's a peculiar feel about Freemasonry in this country that people are very wary of it. They see it as a kind of corrupt hidden government, almost, which means that Freemasons don't advertise their membership. So it's a lot more closed, possibly because society makes it so. I mean, from what I can read, they try to advertise and appear to be more open, but I don't know what the actual truth is.
Julio posted his question to the text chat. It was, what is the target audience for the Praxis?
The target audience would change. Initially, it will be probably transhumanists who already understand the basic ideas of how all this might come about or be implemented. The second tier would be a rewording of the ideas of the Praxis in more kind of occult or traditional religious terms, and that would be aimed at the kind of New Age audience, which is a very general description. The third tier would be people like Freemasons, and the fourth tier would be people who've never really thought about this before. I mean, in Britain is a peculiar place where we have a state religious education, which seems to inoculate everybody against religion while they're at school, and as such, we're a de facto very atheist society. You ask somebody whether they believe in God, they'll probably say yes, but they won't go to church, they won't know much about any kind of religious practice, they just have this kind of vague idea that there is something or should be something. And that is the final target audience.
How much support is there for the Praxis among Zero State members?
It's fairly high. I mean, there are some people who don't like it, or who are hardcore atheists and don't like the transhumanist message being interpreted in a religious manner. But they're sort of fairly accepting. I mean, the Zero State principles, as long as the Praxis stays within the Zero State principles, which is that we don't actually preach anything that is obviously false or demonstrably false, then people are fairly happy about it. And the whole of the Praxis is predicated, or the oath of the Praxis is predicated on, if this technology, or if we have the ability to raise people from the dead, or raise our members from the dead, we do so. I mean, if you don't think it's possible, then that's not a problem. If you do think it's possible, then the Praxis is committing you to do that, even when you have that power. So you don't actually have to believe anything. All you have to believe is that, or all you have to state is that if this does become possible, then we shall do it.
So Julio posted a couple of other questions.
Okay.
One of them is the Praxis the official religion of Zero State?
No, Zero State has no official religion. It has no official government. It has no official anything really. Zero state, I mean, this is a whole new debate about what zero state actually is and stands for. Zero is defined by some very basic principles, which you can find on the Zero State site, zerostate.net. And anybody within Zero State can do whatever they like and call themselves Zero State, as long as it's within those principles. The Zero State encourages people to, our motto is just do it. You know, if you want something done, nobody's doing it yet, then do it and call it Zero State. Zero State has kind of pretensions towards being a transnational virtual community, a nation in itself. And as such, you know, we're all citizens, and citizens can do pretty much whatever they want within the law. I mean, I don't have to ask the government if I want to go and set up, you know, sort of an organization called the Praxis, nor do I have to ask Zero State for permission. I just do it.
And Julio asks another question. He says, can you point to any significant difference between the Praxis, the MTA, and TerraSem?
Ultimately, I'm not too familiar with the kind of deep theology of either of the other organizations, but what the Praxis does emphasize is a geographically based fellowship, which is much more akin to Freemasonry. And we also take a pledge to look, as far as possible, to look after each other, to favor our own people. I'm not sure whether TerraSem or the MTA does that. So all things being equal, if you're hiring somebody, you hire a member of the Praxis. And we take the accusations that people level against Freemasons and we openly embrace them, providing it's ethical to do so, of course. I mean, does the MTA take that position?
Which position in particular?
That we favor members of our own group over other people, yeah, all other factors being equal.
The MTA doesn't have any particularly, well, let me rephrase that. The only explicit positions of the MTA are encapsulated in the Transhumanist Declaration and in the Mormon Transhumanist Affirmation. You're probably familiar with the Declaration. The Affirmation is just 3 points and basically talks about the importance of science and technology and its applicability to religious pursuits. So there's not very stringent requirements on the members of the MTA. Members of the MTA don't have to be Mormon. They don't have to be transhumanist. They only have to support, not even necessarily agree with, but they have to support the Transhumanist Declaration and the Mormon Transhumanist Affirmation. Okay,
so one significant difference is the fact that we're more of a kind of, or aim to be, more of a kind of self-help organization that will have a practical temporal application rather than purely a spiritual one.
Yeah, you know, one of the reasons for that, probably, that difference, is that most members of the MTA are already affiliated with a religious organization, and the MTA is not a religious organization. Our goal is to support our members in their personal religious affiliations, whether they're Mormon or otherwise. Of course, most of them are Mormon. And so because of that, I think there's a slightly different emphasis where it seems to me that the Praxis is more oriented towards being the religion. The MTA is a complement to religion.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good description. I'm not sure about what the TerraSem position is on this. Does anybody here know about it or know sufficient?
TerraSem also is aimed at being a religion, not a complement to religion.
Okay, but they actually focus on a kind of fellowship, essentially.
Oh yeah, I would imagine that they make that quite explicit like the Praxis is doing. Of course, in practice, the MTA does quite the same. It provides a strong social network for religious transhumanists that are of Mormon inclination. So in practice, I would say that that community is emphasized in all three, although it may be more explicitly championed or at least articulated in the case of the Praxis or Terrasim, whereas in the Mormon Transhumanist Association, the working assumption is that we're trying to complement the religious organizations that our members may already be associated with.
Yeah, I see Julia has just texted that Terrasim can be a standalone religion, but also as a kind of second religion for people. And that I think is also similar in some ways to the Praxis, in that obviously it's not compatible with all religions, but it is compatible with the very sort of basic theology of, say, Christianity, if you wish to interpret it in that manner. But then I can also foresee us developing, creating, becoming a multitude of gods in the future. So it can be quite compatible with the kind of paganism as well. It depends on the individual's interpretation.
Dirk, that is interesting, because that does seem to be along the model of the Unitarian Universalists, which kind of act as a container religion for a lot of other different religious viewpoints. And I know there's within the Unitarian Church they have Buddhist and Christian and other streams of thought that they try to entertain within their own kind of religious practice.
Yeah, that's quite encouraging. I never really used to sort of look much at the Unitarians until even when I was teaching in their premises. I've taken a closer look more recently. It seems at one time it was a lot bigger than it is now. Is that correct in the USA as well?
Yeah, I think it is. In American history, the Unitarian was a very distinctively American rationalist movement that was pretty popular in some quarters, for pretty influential, I guess, for a long time. But I think is not nearly as culturally relevant as it once was.
Yeah, the obvious benefit, or the obvious material benefit, is that they still have a lot of infrastructure. They still have physical churches that they run, where they can host meetings and talks and so forth. And I think that is quite a key element of any religion.
One of the kind of the unique advantages that the MTA has is that the Mormon religion is already arguably highly transhumanist, even though they don't use the word transhumanism. And as a consequence, most members of the MTA, when they participate in their weekly church services, their communions, they're already engaging in a transhumanist ceremony. And I suggest that's true to varying extents of other religions as well. It's just more explicit, more obvious for the Mormons, and I think that's probably why you see the development of an organization like the MTA that's tending more towards a complementary stance than maybe some other religious transhumanist organizations, where they're trying to fill what may be perceived as a vacuum or a need or a lack to fill. So, for example, the Mormon transhumanists, by and large, they're not looking to fill an emotional need associated with ritual for transhumanism. They're already getting it. We go to our temples as Mormons and we engage in ceremonies for our ancestors. related to our expectation that those ceremonies will help them gain salvation in the future. And that salvation, of course, in Mormonism is understood in very embodied materialistic terms. We don't look for a heaven out there. Our heaven is here on earth, transfigured into a glorified state. So those things, there's so much that Mormon transhumanists don't have to develop because the religion provides it already. What the MTA ends up doing is just making it more explicit, calling it out where the transhumanism is and saying, see, this is transhumanism. See, this is where technology fits. Because, of course, most of the religious language doesn't make that explicit, even if the ideas, once put in that context, are quite obviously transhumanist, even though those terms weren't available to describe it at the time the vocabularies were put together.
Yeah, I think the overall message is that throughout human history we've developed religions which state how they believe things to be, but what they actually do is state how people would like things to be, not necessarily how they are. So we want a cure to aging, we want eternal life, we want eternal happiness, and we want all the idealized conditions met. And it's only becoming partially clear now how that could actually arise, or if you believe the simulation argument, already has arisen. So in many ways, transhumanism is ultimately not an atheist, the ultimate in atheism. It's the ultimate in religious expression. It is the hardcore scientific backstop of all religion. This is how we'll do it, or how it's already been done. But if I was trying to do something like the MTA, I wouldn't do it with Christianity. We just end up as yet another tiny little splinter sect amongst tens of thousands of splinter sects. I mean, when I go through London, especially South London, if you're on the bus, you can look out the window, you go down some streets, and you see every crappy, insane little religious group, Christian group, has its own shop front. And we'd just be one amongst those, so it's not worth doing. We can accept Christian members, and we can accept members from any religion really, as long as they take the basic oath, which is quite modest. But if this ability arises to resurrect the dead, we will do it, and we'll look after each other. It's not saying that. It's not even saying we are going to do this. It's just saying if we can do it. If we can't do it, we can't do it. We just look after each other then. And we'll have our own expectations as to whether this will occur or has occurred.
Hey, I kind of had a thought about the Unitarian situation and so forth, and I think early on they were a movement that was promoting intellectualism or rationality within religion, and they took that kind of and that was their purpose, and what that has become is more of as I understand it, organization for people who can't really stand any other religious organization, who can't really agree with the thoughts or beliefs of a regular religious society, and so it becomes a place to go when you can't deal with anybody else. And I think the weakness of that, at least in American culture, is because it doesn't have a belief or even a perspective that they're promoting. It's really hard to give people a great reason why you should join this or why this is desirable. This is it's kind of for a lot of people probably a way station on the way from being religious to being non-religious, something like that. And so I think maybe if movements like that could maybe regain a sense of having a mission or a purpose, then they would be a lot more compelling.
A non-reactionary mission or purpose, not just one that says they're being irrational and we stand for the fact that they are irrational.
Right, exactly.
Well, I think the Praxis has two very attractive features. One is it's a fellowship whereby we actually are attempting to supply a community and to look after each other. And the second is that we will resurrect you from the dead. We will care enough to do it if that becomes possible. Because the only other people who will care enough are your immediate descendants. I mean, once you've gone beyond great-grandfather level, I mean, I don't know my great-grandfather. I'd have to go to the records and look them up. And much beyond that, I don't really care enough to put in that time and effort if I was some kind of post-human. But we make a specific pledge, and as an organization, hopefully that will carry through any singularity that arises with this purpose in mind, that we will do this for our members. And that's what it's about.
Building on Micah's comments a little bit, when I look back at major figures in religious history, and most particularly when I look back at Jesus, I see a strategy that is one of embracing traditional religion and extending it, of training those around, of a new interpretation, of an expansive interpretation of the traditional religion, so that they can build on common ground together rather than the rejection of those traditions. And I think that's a major mistake that some religious transhumanists engage in, is the idea that we need to purge ourselves of the old religions and we need to create something entirely new. Well, I do think we need new, and we need more, and we need better. I think that can be done without purging and without rejecting, on the whole. Now, of course, there are extents to which, rejection of certain kinds of things is part of evolution. But I think that there's so much good and so much constructive and so much tradition that can be built on, that it's a mistake not to build on our traditions and our history.
I would agree with that. I mean, there is something the Praxis rejects, one of which is quite key, is coercion. I mean, I hope to say all religions, but most of the major religions have relied on coercion in the past. And that is not something that Praxis, or I assume the MTA, would embrace. And
Julio, in his comments, he mentions that there was a transhumanist, Unitarian, Universalist network that was set up, and he hasn't heard of them for years. My hypothesis is that the reason, Julio, you haven't heard of them for years is that they broke too far from the traditional motivations for religion. They didn't create enough of a bridge and an understanding about how what they were standing for was the extension of these human yearnings that have driven our religious life for millennia. And then when we don't do that, when we come and we say, you know what, here we are, we have this new idea, and all those old ideas, that's what they are, old ideas. We've got this new stuff, check it out. Really what we're doing is we're being, I think, arrogant. And so what we ought to do is, think, what did these ancient people know and feel and live? And, to the extent that we are still such humans, and we are to a very large extent, although our technology has changed, our anatomy hasn't changed all that much from the people who developed these ancient religions. And so these motivations and feelings and promptings and aspirations and hopes, all of these things, they're still with us. Why did the religions that were selected for by our ancient cultures and were handed down to us, why did they succeed? And if we're overlooking all of that, man, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, I think also one of the things that has made religions powerful in the past are the the basic fellowship of people getting together physically, you know, feeling they're not alone, but also a sense of identity. And I think that's one thing that transhumanists particularly lack. There's no social side to transhumanism. There's an intellectual side, but not much beyond that. When you may disagree, I mean, what do you think?
No, I actually agree that that's been a problem, and that that to some extent it's starting to develop. You know, I think I've seen that sort of community developing among some of the secular transhumanists. Yeah, in fact, Julio just posted a great example, the Extreme Futurist Festival. Or maybe he's talking about a different one, a futurist meetup in London. Anyway, there's also been this Extreme Futurist Festival in California where it seems to be developing a sense of community. Of course, that sense of community won't make all transhumanists comfortable or feel, you know, bonded with each other. I suspect that most Mormon transhumanists would prefer alternative ways of developing religious community or developing community generally. That's not to say that no Mormon transhumanists would enjoy the Extreme Futurist Festival. I'm sure many of them would, but I don't think it's the most powerful way of reaching out to the audience that the MTA seeks to serve. But that's okay, you know, as you're talking about, Dirk, in saying, you know, you have a particular audience you're pursuing. Transhumanism is not monolithic, nor should it be. Humanity isn't, nor should it be. And so there's lots of ways that we ought to be reaching out to each other to develop community.
Yeah, I mean, Julio just mentioned. Sorry, do you want to speak?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, Julio mentioned that London Futurists. That's getting a lot of people now. I think we've got members up to about 150 attending various lectures. However, the problem is people come, listen to the lecture, and they go away again. By sense of community, what I mean is essentially people getting together to talk to each other, not to listen to somebody at the front. You know, party time, basically.
I was going to comment on what Lincoln was saying. There's a term people sometimes use called transcend and include, and so it was the idea that you know, we are always moving beyond what's come before, but in doing so, that we are taking what's come before with us, or bringing it with us and raising it. And you know, I think your comment about not kind of throwing away history is really relevant, because you know, there have been many attempts to create new languages, new spoken languages around better principles. So Esperanto is a particularly successful attempt to recreate language in a rational way. And the weakness of those sorts of things is that they're typically the creation of one person, and thus they can't take into account the fact that the spoken languages of humanity have built on the impulses of millions of people over millennia. And so there's a kind of hidden knowledge or a hidden wisdom to spoken languages that's easy to overlook. And I think that's true when we try to deal with inspiring people or motivating people, or dealing with their religious impulses. When we try to start from scratch, then we miss so much that's not obvious.
Yeah, it's an interesting parallel, languages and religion. Something that surprised me a few years ago when I discovered it was that the further you go back in time, the more perfect the language becomes, until you sort of go back to something like Sanskrit, which is incredibly logical. I mean, compared to English is just a total mishmash. It doesn't really follow the rules. It's just, you know, as a language, it's crap, but people use it. Something like Sanskrit, though, or even Latin, is far more logical. And this parallels religion all the religious ideas. You know, you go back to Jesus this time, it was all a lot better because you're closer to the source and so forth. But I'm very surprised. I mean, does anybody here know enough about languages to sort of explain this? How languages start off incredibly logical and yet deteriorate in the kind of logical structure so rapidly.
Or perhaps it's not so much a deterioration as it is an evolution to fill in the complexity and contours of a pluralistic world that we actually live in.
Yes, I mean, to an extent that's got to be true. I mean, English, for example, is a bad mixture of German and French with some Latin and a few other bits and pieces, including Sanskrit. But what surprises me is how can a language evolve to become grammatically perfect in the first place? Something like Sanskrit.
I saw a study recently that was talking about they'd done some kind of an analysis on how well information was being transmitted via spoken language, and they'd actually kind of come to the conclusion that the most efficient method of sending information was to have a lot of words that sounded or had a lot of words that had very many different meanings, but could be differentiated based on context. And so that seems very illogical to me, you know, in a sense. Like, I would rather have one word that meant exactly one thing, and so forth. But in terms of communication efficiency, that's actually not the way that makes the most sense. And so, you know, it appears that our language is optimized for certain types of efficiency and error correction and so forth, that are maybe, you know, not we're not even aware of yet.
Let me give religion as well.
Yeah, let me throw out an application of that to religion, and I'm going to compliment Micah in doing so. So Micah, you're welcome to blush on the screen. Micah has become something of a rock star among Mormon transhumanists, although Micah is not a Mormon, and, you know, until probably recently has had relatively little insight into what Mormons even think. And so the reason why Micah has succeeded despite, you know, any really explicit familiarity with Mormonism is that he's using a language and tradition that Mormons are familiar with, even if slightly different things have been meant by those words, as people have used them contemporarily or even historically. Micah can come in and talk from a Christian perspective, use texts that Mormons respect, and use words that Mormons are familiar with, even if they might be understanding slightly different things than what Micah or people from his faith tradition understand when he uses those words. But because of that interchange, he's been remarkably successful in communicating with Mormons. And I think that speaks volumes to the power of ambiguity in words and the tradition and history of words, and not throwing away that ambiguity or history, because it automatically builds bridges of understanding and interest for people.
Yeah, thank you, Lincoln. Yeah, that's very flattering. You're right. I've you know, until probably a year and a half ago, I had very little knowledge of Mormonism at all, and I've been surprised to find you know, as much kind of shared ground conceptually and so forth. And so that's been kind of an amazing discovery to me. And even though I haven't done really probably what I, you know, I should have done, the research I should have done in trying to communicate, still it's been you know, an amazing connection for me to have, amazing kind of two-way communication between, you know, me and all of your ways of looking at things. So I've been really appreciative of that.
And then, you know, ultimately that's That's what's going on with all of these attempts at religious transhumanism in Terrasim and the Praxis and the MTA, of course, is that there's a language bridge that needs to be built between what we know and understand religion to be, even if it's only intuitive, right? Even if we don't explicitly define religion, which may be a mistake anyway. But we have this intuitive sense of religion generally, and then we have transhumanism, which provides a very powerful, pragmatic expression of how we can realize aspirations. And a bridge is being built between those two things, and it's a language bridge. And the only way that language bridge is ever going to be fully fleshed out is to the extent that we use vocabulary that's familiar with both sides of the river.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. You can talk about, I mean, one of the things I talk about in the book, The Praxis, is Judgment Day, because although we pledge to resurrect our ancestors, I mean, some people clearly you don't want back. I mean, Jack the Ripper being one, and at least not in an unmodified form. And you can argue that if you modify Jack the Ripper so he's no longer Jack the Ripper, he's not Jack the Ripper, and he's not coming back. Something with a similar history might have. Or another example, Hitler. Hitler the dictator won't come back, but Hitler the artist who got into his art school instead of being rejected might come back. So there is a kind of commonality between the religious meme of Judgment Day and stuff that we're talking about in the Praxis. And I would assume that Terrasim or the MTA wouldn't want to bring people back who are totally evil and then hand them godlike powers in a new super society. That there would be some modifications going on.
In the Mormon tradition, we certainly don't think that evil persons should be given godlike powers, nor that they'll be able to maintain any power long term. We do think that there's the ability for evil people to have degrees of power over the short run, but over the long run, they can't maintain it. But we do hold in Mormonism, just generally, and I'm not even talking about Mormon transhumanists, I'm talking about the Mormon tradition as a whole, we do hold that everyone will be resurrected, without exception. Well, almost without exception. There's a very, very, very narrow caveat given to persons whose desires are so incongruent with all possible worlds that they would choose not to exist at all. But we don't talk a whole lot about that. It's contained in our scriptural writings. But for the most part, everyone, including Hitler, will be resurrected from a Mormon perspective. But they'll be resurrected to different places and with different degrees of power and with opportunities to learn and hopefully change. In the case of Hitler, I would suggest, and actually in all of our cases, really, in Mormonism, we have this idea of eternal progression, where we all continue to learn and grow and change, hopefully for the better, throughout eternity.
Yeah, I think I can agree with that. I mean, the number of people who are so irredeemably evil from day zero is probably negligible. I mean, if you look at, for example, serial killers, which are probably the current icon of evil, a lot of them have sustained brain damage as children, or have gone through very traumatic circumstances that, had circumstances been different, they would have ended up completely differently. So, it's the question of not condemning the child because of the man he's about to become.
Yeah, indeed. And I think there's an important compassion in being willing, within reason and with proper constraints and without being stupid, giving even a Hitler a chance to maybe express an interest in change.
Well, I'd imagine if somebody like Hitler was put in a position where they could fulfill their total dreams of world domination and take it to the absolute ultimate, that they'd end up somewhere totally horrific, even from their own point of view. So maybe you can allow people's fantasies to run to completion as a lesson. Which is an interesting speculation. I mean, the room I'm sitting in isn't my idea of perfection, so presumably I'm not in that one. not that resurrection scenario, but yeah, an interesting idea.
Yeah, I do need to get going. I've got a son who has a soccer game soon, but I've enjoyed the conversation and the ideas. And Dirk, I think I mentioned this to you before. I've read your book and I found it very intriguing. I continue to be interested in watching what you guys are doing with the Praxis.
Well, hopefully I'll have a proper introduction, YouTube style, with slide presentations, and then they're not too different future, not too different future, not too distant future as well. So maybe we can sort of discuss
Forward
that
to
next
that.
time.
I'll also have to go in a little while.
Thanks a lot for your time, guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye, Dirk, Micah, Julia.